When we walk through the woods or over a field, we are hardly aware of what an incredible miracle of creation is found directly under our feet. A billionfold life is hidden in the soil, most of it invisible to our eyes. Under the surface area of a foot exist more living beings than there are humans on the whole earth. Without this ingenious microcreation in the soil, with its tiny creatures, there would be no life on Earth. And without this underground cosmos, there would be no food for us, no fruit, no vegetables, no trees, herbs, and no grass for the animals. Why is this so? Because from the remains of dead plants, the microorganisms in the soil produce valuable humus that contains the vital minerals and nutrients necessary for the growth of plants, nutrients that would not be available solely from the air or rainwater. And this marvel of creation, the human being literally tramples on, as we shall see later in a figurative sense. Some examples may give us an idea of the unbelievable magnitude of this hidden life concealed in the top 30 centimeters of soil. Under ideal conditions, the weight of all the organisms living in a forest floor can reach 25 tons in an area 100 meters square. In an arable soil, there are at least 4 to 5 tons of living beings working diligently on this surface area under our feet. If we were to examine the upper 30 centimeters of a small area, just 1 meter square, we find on the average 80 earthworms, 50 snails, 50 spiders, 50 wood lice, 100 larvae of dipterous insects, 100 beetle larvae, 10,000 bristleworms, 25,000 deloid rotifers, 50,000 springtails, 100,000 mites, 1 million nematodes or threadworms, and 1.6 trillion microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, and algae. These are numbers beyond our power of imagination, and all that in 1 single square meter of soil. But even in a handful of soil, billionfold life is concealed, invisible to our eyes. To better grasp the amount of life in the soil with our consciousness, let's reduce the amount of soil to be examined to a few grams. Even in a spoonful of fertile farmland or meadowland, there are still over 1 billion bacteria, millions of fungi, and thousands of microorganisms living there. So even the life in a single spoonful of soil exceeds by far the human power of imagination. These examples demonstrate how inconceivably diverse and abundant the life in the soil is. And all this functions as if automatically. Everything is ingeniously organized. Every single little animal performs its task with great zeal. They transform the remains of plants and dead matter into valuable humus. The leaves that have fallen on the ground, or the dead plant and root mass, are diligently taken in and turned into fertile humus by the soil creatures. In addition, the soil life supplies the plants with bound nitrogen from the air, mineral nutrients dissolved from the rocks, and thanks to a stable soil structure with sufficient cavities to ensure a good supply of water and the necessary ventilation. So it loosens the soil. And it does something that a human being can never achieve with all his modern technology. It makes the right nutrients available to the plants at the right time and in the right place. Science will never be able to research and comprehend this complicated ecosystem in all its complexity and abundance. But this system functions so perfectly only as long as the human being does not step in and disorganize everything. For example, by plowing deeply, which brings the upper layers into oxygen-poor depths where they don't belong. The microorganisms that are normally endemic to the upper layers cannot live so deep in the ground. But also in the soil, compacted by heavy tractors, it is no longer possible for many living organisms to fulfill their tasks. In addition, the water can no longer seep into the soil, which can have fatal consequences. Not lastly, the viability of many organisms is limited or destroyed with chemical fertilizers and sprayed poisons such as herbicides, fungicides, and other chemicals. Even traditional fertilization with caustic slurry, so favored by the farmers, can chemically burn and kill many of our little helpers in the soil. Today, for many farmers, the soil has often become a mere means of production, from which, by hook or crook, they get the maximum out of it. The farmer Jens Petermann experienced how this can end up. He studied agricultural engineering and farming and operated a farm by cultivating the land and running a dairy for 13 years. One day he experienced a nasty surprise. A rather harmless rain shower washed the soil off his 19-hectare cornfield, leaving behind erosion gullies, or better said, erosion ravines, of up to 1.8 meters deep. Mr. Petermann was shocked. His field had become unrecognizable. He had operated his farm as he had learned at the university. For the first time, Petermann doubted his agricultural training and realized that something was wrong. He now wanted to get to the bottom of it himself. He realized that the soil is a sensitive biological structure and that once it has been destroyed, it needs a lot of time until it can function again. Tests on his field showed that the soil was too strongly compacted because it had been worked and fertilized too intensely. The upper layers of the soil, which should be teeming with life, were dead. By using the plow, fertilizers and pesticides, the farmer had killed the life on his own field. Thus, the water could not seep in and washed away the soil that had become unstable. After this shock, Jens Petermann now treats his soil with care and plows only rarely, and then only on the surface, and even sows the wheat directly on the harvested corn and sunflower fields. A healthy soil can develop only when the laws of nature are kept. That's his opinion today. And he warns, if we don't learn to treat the soil differently, we'll slide into a disaster. In any case, Mr. Petermann has learned his lesson. He exposes his bare fields to the weather as little as possible. He knows today that the so-called weeds are very useful and may not be sprayed to death, because their roots hold the soil together and protect it from sun, rain, and wind. In addition, they nourish the soil life. For Jens Petermann, there is no going back to a cultivation that is foreign to nature, like what he had learned in his studies, no matter how strong the economic pressure may be. He hopes that the consumers become more sensitive and develop an awareness for high-quality farm products and are also willing to pay somewhat more for good quality. But Jens Petermann is not the only farmer whose surface soil was washed away after a rain shower because of an unnatural way of farming. In Europe, per generation, a half centimeter of soil disappears, which is washed into the ocean via the rivers. Not only water can cause great damage to unprotected fields that are cultivated conventionally, but also the wind. With reports in the news of disasters, we often hear those affected exclaim, "We never had such a storm," or "We can't remember such a torrential rain of this extent." The reason? The looming climate change is increasingly generating weather anomalies of unusual strength. Unprotected and conventionally farmed fields are not only at the mercy of increasingly strong rainfall, but also of increasingly strong storms. An example. On Friday, April 8, 2011 at 12:30 p.m., a storm with wind speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour blew a freshly plowed field into the lanes of the Autobahn A19 in Germany. Within seconds, visibility sank to under a meter. Many vehicles could not brake in time, and the pileup of 80 vehicles occurred in both directions. 8 dead, 131 injured, dozens of burned-out cars. That was the shocking result of this disaster. Later, the soil expert Burkhard Roloff of the German Federation for the Environment and Nature Conservation took a look at the field in question and dug up a soil sample. What he saw was sobering. The soil was compacted and dead. No life, not even an earthworm in sight. No weeds, everything sprayed to death. For the soil expert, it was clear that here work had been done with artificial fertilizers and poisons. The soil was riddled with cracks, bare and unprotected. Farmland of this kind, above all when the crop sown is still small, can easily be stirred up and carried away by storms or washed away by strong rain. At the latest, when the climate change causes increasingly strong storms to sweep over the fields and hitherto unusual heavy downpours plague the land, it will become apparent that something has to change. It's hard to understand that of all people, farmers, for whom a healthy soil is indispensable, indeed the basis of their occupation, torment the life in the soil to such an extent, finally killing it with all sorts of means. Shouldn't soil science and nature conservation be the most important disciplines in the education of farmers? Perhaps the life in the soil is ignored because it's invisible to the naked eye. That's why it's important that ever more people learn to understand what is taking place beneath our feet, mostly invisible to our eyes. The soil life is divided into two groups. The by far largest part of the soil life is called the soil flora, namely the bacteria, fungi, lichens, and algae. They amount to about 80% of the life in the soil. On the other hand, all animal organisms in the soil are counted as soil fauna. They add up to about 20% of the soil life. Depending on the size of the organisms, the soil fauna are divided into megafauna, macrofauna, mesofauna, and microfauna. The animals living in the soil that are larger than 20 millimeters are classified under the megafauna. They include earthworms and vertebrates that live partly or completely in the soil and have their homes and nests there, such as moles, rabbits, hamsters, badgers, marmots, and many kinds of mice. Reptiles also belong to this group, such as salamanders, newts, and amphibians. In terms of numbers, earthworms are probably the largest group of megafauna. Their way of life contributes greatly to the formation of humus and friable soil, and not lastly to ventilating the soil. Earthworms feed on leaves, grasses, and dead parts of plants. If we take a closer look at humus, perhaps with a magnifying glass, we can often find tiny worm eggs. Maybe, with luck, we can even watch the birth of a baby worm. First, the front part is formed into a thin but hard point in order to squeeze into the tiny cracks in the ground. Then the middle part is moved forward and inflated so that the channel gets wider. We see that earthworms are tough and hard workers in the soil. With a life expectancy of up to 8 years, they can produce up to 100 tons of valuable worm leavings per hectare and year. Compared with a good garden soil, on the average, the droppings of earthworms contain 5 times more magnesium, 5 times more nitrogen, 7 times more phosphorus, and 11 times more potassium. It's pure gold for the plants, and at that, free. Smaller animals between 2 and 20 millimeters large are classified in the next smaller group of living creatures, the Macrofauna. They include animals and insects such as snails, centipedes, spiders, woodlice, ants, beetles, and their larvae. What many people do not know is that snails are also industrious producers of humus. They have a tongue with tiny teeth, with which they can shred parts of plants and leaves into tiny pieces. The primary work of the living creatures in the Macrofauna is the coarse shredding of plant residues. Wouldn't it be nice if with simple means we were able to have a glimpse into the wonder world of soil life? For just 2 to 3 euros, you can purchase on the technology market macro lenses that fit on every cell phone camera. They are very easily fastened over the camera lens with a clip. But is it also possible to watch some of the little industrious fellows at work with this simple tool? One should be able to watch at least some of the larger representatives of the so-called Macrofauna. We want to put an example to the test. For instance, with a cell phone camera we can watch ants very well with a clipped-on macro lens. Here, a woodlouse, which just entered an ant street, is inspected very closely. Woodlice see to the shredding of plant residues, which they transform into humus in their intestines. Wood ants build their nests into big hills, whereby a part twice as large is underground. Other ants build only underground nests. Passages and chambers traverse the soil at various depths. Most ants form colonies with 1 or more queens. The colonies consist of female soldiers, workers, and male drones whose sole task is to mate with the queen during her wedding flight. There are also ant species that milk the leaf and root lice, or aphids. In return for the sweet honeydew, the ants protect the lice from predators such as ladybugs. With the example of a large rhubarb flower, the stem of which is covered with aphids, we want to see if we can watch and film the milking of the aphids using a cell phone with an attached macro lens. We see bustling activity. We can actually see how the ants massage the abdomens of the aphids to get them to release the sweet honeydew. And here we can really see how the aphids deliver the coveted sugar nutrient to the ants, which the ants pick up and later bring to their nests. All the living creatures in the soil between a size of 0.3 and 1 millimeter are classified as Mesofauna. These include mites, springtails, tardigrades, rotifers, little fireworms, and bigger threadworms or nematodes. Just in a square meter of soil, there are supposed to be about 50,000 springtails at home. So in a tablespoon of soil, we should find hundreds of springtails. That's hard to believe, for when we look ever so closely at a spoonful of soil, we can't see any little animals with the naked eye. We do a test and shake a spoonful of soil into a sieve that we shake a few times over a white plate. And indeed, with our naked eye now we can see lots of tiny points hopping around. They are the springtails. In between, several mites are racing around. With the cell phone's microlens, we can watch the springtails well. They play a very important role in the formation of humus because they shred fallen leaves and other plant material. Up to now, more than 6,000 species of springtails have been discovered. Who would have thought that so much life is in just one spoonful of soil? And there are even lots and lots more creatures, most of which, however, we can see only under a microscope. With about 50,000 known species, the mites, which are also included in the Mesofauna, are the most species-rich group of arachnids. Over 100 years ago, students at Harvard University compiled drawings of the different types of mites. The tiniest mites are only about 0.1 millimeter big. The majority of mite species live in the soil and make an important contribution there to the formation of humus. Under ideal conditions, up to several 100,000 live and work on one single square meter. When we sifted the spoonful of soil, several mites also fell through the sieve. Are our mites included in the drawings? We are lucky. That must be them. Only the shell has to be changed. Perfect. That's them. Even as laypersons, with luck, we can also discover still many tiny living creatures using an inexpensive school microscope. Under the microscope, a drop of water from a depression in the ground reveals a world full of life. Here, with 10 times magnification, we discover a nematode, also called an eelworm. 1 million of them live in a square meter of soil. Up to now, more than 20,000 different species have been discovered. Probably they are also the individually richest group among the multicelled animals, and according to an estimate, represent about 81% of all animal organisms. A brownish and almost graceful creature of the Mesofauna is the tardigrade, also called the water bear. They are so tiny that they were not discovered until the end of the 18th century. For them, a drop of water is about as large as a football field is for people. Tardigrades have 8 legs with claws, muscles, eyes, stomachs, mouth, etc., and of course, all of them thousands of times smaller than a person, since they weigh a mere 1/1,000,000th of a gram. Tardigrades survive even the most extreme environmental conditions, for example, dryness. They enter a kind of rigor mortis. During an experiment, they even survived without oxygen and in the icy cold for 10 days in free space. Back on the Earth, they blithely continue to multiply. Other creatures in the Mesofauna are the 0.1 to 0.5 millimeter large rotifers. These creatures have mobile eyelashes on their heads, which serve for forward motion on the one hand, and on the other to get better access to food particles. Worldwide, about 2,000 partially very different species have been discovered. With the stronger magnification on the microscope, even smaller living creatures become visible in the soil. They form the so-called microfauna. They include tiny creatures of 0.002 to 0.2 millimeters in size. There's no doubt that the soil lives. Countless microorganisms populate just a little drop of moisture from the soil. It is an exceedingly diligent and lively working together. The biggest group, with over 1 million inhabitants per square meter of soil, are the flagellates. More than 6,000 species have been discovered so far. They live in water-filled pores in the ground. They too, like many other microorganisms, feed on animal and plant residues. These single-celled creatures use a kind of whip or flagella to propel them forward, therefore their name, flagellates. Here a tiny creature is cheerfully swimming through our drop of water. It pulls a long, undulating flagellum behind it. If we watch these creatures for a while and see what everyday problems they have to deal with, something like sympathy for these teeny co-inhabitants of our planet begins to grow. For instance, here, a tiny creature tries to get through a tunnel. It simply doesn't work. Now comes the saving idea: backward, with a narrower tail leading the way. And here, a ball-like creature finds no exit and acts increasingly desperate. Hopefully, it finds it soon. Ah, now it's found it. Here, a tardigrade seems to be hard at work. What for the tardigrade looks like a big earth wall that needs to be moved is actually a microscopically fine, tiny piece of soil. As tiny as these creatures are, we would not see or feel hundreds of them on a moist fingertip, but they have everything they need to live. Also a tiny beating heart, as we can clearly see here. Isn't nature an incredible miracle? In large as well as in microscopically tiny creatures? Why does humankind destroy all this ingenuity? Along with the flagellates, rhizopods and ciliates, as well as tinier nematodes, are inhabitants of the microfauna. The ciliates are likewise one-celled living creatures whose surface is often completely or partly covered with cilia, which are used for locomotion and to cause the swirling of food particles. Up to now, science has counted over 7,500 different species of ciliates. They are considered the most highly developed microscopic living beings. As already mentioned, the by far largest part of soil life, namely the bacteria, fungi, lichens and algae, which make up about 80% of the life in the soil, are called soil flora. Bacteria are some of the tiniest and most numerous microorganisms in the soil. They promote plant growth and also improve water storage by ensuring nutrient turnover and stabilizing the soil structure. Together, the bacteria and fungi make the biggest contribution to the disintegration of organic matter, transforming it into the vital nutrients that plants need for growing. Over 100 million bacteria with a variety of over 5,000 species can live in one single gram of soil. The bacteria, which can look bullet-shaped, screw-shaped or rod-shaped, are single-celled organisms, which can be viewed only with a strong microscope. Several species move by way of flagella, others let themselves float with the current. No one knows how many different species of fungi exist, and no one will ever know. Estimates reach up to 5 million species worldwide, of which, however, about 100,000 are currently recorded scientifically. When in autumn we find a so-called mushroom, that's merely the fruit body of the fungi, which has the task of spreading the seeds, or better said, the spores. The actual fungus is an underground living fine network of threads that pervades the soil. Soil fungi often grow around plant roots to support their growth by helping them take in nourishment. To do this, the fungi sometimes even emit growth hormones. This constantly growing network of fungi is always seeking moisture and nutrients, which it then transports farther to places where they are needed. Only recently, researchers have discovered that in dry places, with their pipelines, fungi provide bacteria with moisture and nutrients that are vital for their survival. The human being still has little idea of how soil life works as a whole and finds it miraculous when it is discovered that behind this system perhaps there could be a not coincidental interaction of all life. The intelligence of some life forms also leaves scientists perplexed over and over again. Recently, on a German television show called Knowledge Before 8, the incredible intelligence of a slime fungus was demonstrated in an experiment. The slime fungus immediately found the quickest way out of a labyrinth. But it gets even better. The same slime fungus managed something in a few hours that engineers needed months for. In an experiment by researchers at the Hokkaido University in Sapporo, Japan, the slime fungus found the most favorable traffic connections between Tokyo and the surrounding cities. The superimposed plan of Tokyo's railway system shows how efficiently the fungus connected the individual points. Algae are also included in the soil flora. Their habitat is primarily found in the top millimeters of the soil. They release organic substances into the soil, which they sweat out. Algae are mostly single-celled plants or living beings which can form colonies or filaments, that is, thread-like structural units. Plants or living beings, because on the one hand they practice photosynthesis like plants, and on the other hand because they are mobile and can move freely, as we can see well here. We have now gotten to know the hidden life of a healthy soil. On the growth of plants, we can deduce whether or not the soil is healthy. Healthy soil does not need any artificial fertilizer for healthy grains or vegetables to grow. However, without artificial fertilizer, no grain and no vegetables will grow on dead soil because there are practically no living beings anymore that could prepare the nutrients for plant growth. A soil without life can make plants grow only artificially through chemicals. Most of the bread that today is sold on the market was baked with the flour from grain that, as most of the vegetables sold in supermarkets, is likewise forced to grow, as it were, with chemicals applied to a dead soil. That this, seen in the long run, can have effects on the health of the body and on the mental and spiritual well-being of humans can only be assumed. If one day, for whatever reason, there is no artificial fertilizer left, this could have serious consequences and perhaps even cause a famine. Thus, modern agricultural industry, if they want to harvest a crop on biologically more or less dead soil, is completely dependent on chemical fertilizers and also on the insect and plant obliteration poisons, because by spraying the poisons, the natural enemies of the pests are also eradicated, and thus any natural protection no longer exists. But what consequences for the environment does this have, this cultivation method that is propagated and promoted by farmers' associations, chemical companies, and not least also by the state? One should know that if you destroy with herbicides the weeds with their flowers, you automatically destroy the insects that live on the nectar of the flowers. On July 15, 2017, the German online magazine Der Spiegel ran the headline, "Ministry of the Environment warns of insects dying out, up to 80% fewer insects than in 1982. Further, we could read that the Federal Ministry of the Environment has determined a drastic decrease of many insect species in Germany, with grave results. One of the results is visible already now. If the insects are killed with insecticides and their basis of existence taken away, the flowers of the herbs and weeds via herbicides, you automatically eradicate many birds and bats because many of them live on insects." Thus, according to the Bavarian Broadcasting Company on May 10, 2016, the population of all bat species is endangered. Several are even threatened with extinction. There is only one single colony of the greater horseshoe bat still existent in Germany. It lives in the attic of an old house in the Bavarian region of the Upper Palatinate. It is similar with the birds. If they find no food for themselves and for raising their offspring, many species die out. On May 4, 2017, we could read in Spiegel Online the title, "Ever Fewer Birds in Germany." The federal government responded to an inquiry with the information that the number of birds in Germany and Europe had fallen dramatically during the last 2 decades. It said that appropriate habitats are lacking and the insects needed for their nourishment are disappearing. Politicians are warning of a silent spring. Furthermore, it said that the population of lapwings has decreased by 80%, the number of windchats by 63%, and the population of other birds is shrinking, the number of partridge even by 84%. Considering these dramatic figures, shouldn't an immediate change of thinking take place in politics and agriculture? It's not only the lack of flowers in the sprayed fields that trigger this chain reaction of dying, it's also the hedges and natural biotopes that were, and still are, being eliminated. This unfortunate process began already quite early on, but above all, since the arrival of big farming equipment, the fields that formerly had been divided by hedges and groves were restructured and combined to enable more efficient work on the newly created larger fields with the use of large machines. The widely varied, patchwork-like landscape of individual fields surrounded by hedges, with shrubs and trees in between, yielded to a monotone, unnatural landscape architecture that has no room for trees and other wild plants. Many communities were proud of this new development and even erected monuments to commemorate this land consolidation. Now it is deathly silent in these huge monocultures, eerily still. No life stirs, not a single flower can be seen, no humming of insects, no butterflies, no twittering of birds is heard. Only here and there one sees a tractor underway pulling its tank of poisons to kill off the plants and insects. How can this killing culture that extinguishes the life in and on the soil be justified? In a world that is solely oriented toward profit, these questions may sound naive to many ears. But where should a bird find water to quench its thirst here? Formerly, there were always places where water collected, under an old willow tree, for instance. And where should insects find nectar to nourish themselves here? Where should the bees now find flowers to feed their colony? Bees are very important for humankind because many species of fruit and vegetables are pollinated by bees. If the bees disappear, things will get difficult for humankind because many foodstuffs will become scarce or disappear. It is generally presumed that the dying out of bees is caused by the poisons that are sprayed by the farmers. In large parts of China, pollinator insects have already been very strongly decimated or even completely obliterated through the poisons sprayed by farmers. This is why many Chinese have never seen a living bee. Now hordes of people have to climb the trees to pollinate them. But that's not easy, because every human pollinator needs a kilogram of fresh blossoms every day, which have to be gathered beforehand from the trees. Their pollen then has to be released by hand. About 1 gram of pollen is needed to pollinate one tree. A human being manages about 30 trees per day. In comparison, one single bee colony easily pollinates 300 million blossoms per day. For this, a pollinator army of more than 1,500 people is needed. And while people in China are already having to pay for the consequences of spraying poisons, we are still carrying out a pseudo-discussion about what could well be the reason for the bee mortality. Isn't it absurd that today beekeepers have to move to the cities because more diversity of blossoms and more poison-free nature exists there than in the countryside? Recently, the question is being asked more and more frequently: what can be the solution to cultivate the soil correctly without damaging the soil life, without killing insects, without decimating birds and bats? On September 2, 2017, the German news magazine Der Spiegel published an article entitled "Summer of Silence" and wrote in the subtitle, "Untouched landscape full of chirping crickets and singing birds. That was once." Germany is suffering under the dramatic loss of species. Only a radical change to organic farming could still rescue the diversity. Is organic, that is, certified organic farming a solution? Organic farming is usually combined with keeping farm animals, that is, with the butchering of animals. If we take a closer look at what is possible or even recommended as fertilizer under varying circumstances, this says a lot because much is allowed. From horn fertilizers made from horns and hooves of slaughtered cloven-hooved animals with pelts, flesh and bones, blood meal, feather flour made from feathers, which is produced when slaughtering poultry with adhering skin and dirt from the barn, hair meal pellets, meat bone meal from ground slaughter byproducts, liquid manure and processed slurry up to manure from cows and horses. It is not only vegetarian or vegans who do not have a mouth-watering reaction. The problem of using animal waste products as a fertilizer is connected with the practice of livestock production. This brings up the question, is there at all a species-appropriate animal husbandry? Doesn't every kind of animal want to be free? And when we speak of farm animals, then this automatically also means that the animals will be slaughtered one day. However, today, killing animals is no longer simply accepted by all people. For an increasing number of people, the commandment, "You shall not kill," also applies to the animals. Isn't it a paradox if the animals under the ground are protected, while above the ground they are killed? However, not all organic farmers can be lumped together, since there are great differences in their cultivation practices. Some, above all, apply vegetable compost. In any case, a great advantage of organic farming is the avoidance of using chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and genetically altered organisms, which is beneficial for the life of the soil. The alternative is organic vegan farming. In organic vegan farming, not only are chemical, but also all animal fertilizers taboo, because no animals are kept for slaughter and no products from animal husbandry or slaughter are used. Thus, no fertilizing with manure, slurry, bone, blood or horn meal, hair, pellets, etc. Organic vegan farming is a good method of cultivation to protect and promote the life in the soil. But there is an even better system. If you enter the term peaceable farming in the internet, you will see that a natural, God-pleasing treatment of nature is also possible in farming. In vegan, peaceable farming, no chemicals or poisons are used, as well as animal fertilizers like manure and slurry, because no livestock production is practiced there. No plows are used to work the soil. Instead, the soil is merely loosened on the surface so as not to disturb the soil life. In addition, the goal is a millennia-old tradition of the three-field rotation, in which the field is left fallow every third year to give the soil the necessary rest and opportunity to regenerate. During the fallow year, the field is left alone and the herbs and plants that grow on the field are produced by the soil itself. The field, with all its invisible co-workers, knows best what it needs for its own regeneration. The millennia-old tradition of three-field rotation to give the field a year's pause may, perhaps, be sneered at by some people, but the most recent research now confirms the ingeniousness of this system of cultivation. On September 23, 2017, the German television station ARD reported about a unique meadow experiment that Professor Nico Eisenhower from the Research Center for Integrative Biodiversity has been supervising for 15 years, called the Species-Rich Meadow, an Ecological Multi-Talent. For this outdoor laboratory, 100,000 square meters of meadowland was divided into 90 parcels and sown with various plants and then observed over a 15-year period. The clear result surprised the scientist. Aside from a very rich soil life, the parcel with the most plant species had the highest share of nitrogen content. Thus, it is now scientifically proven nature can do it best. Quality and the preservation of life are thus in the foreground of this vegan peaceable cultivation method and not the quantity and thus not the profit. In order to nevertheless survive economically, direct marketing is done to people who also have an awareness of nature and animal protection and appreciate this quality. Pure natural substances are used to strengthen and fertilize the soil and the crops. For instance, in autumn, fallen leaves, plant compost, or ground rock are applied. As mentioned, no livestock production is practiced in vegan peaceable farming. Animals are respected as fellow creatures and neither killed nor eaten. All around the fields of vegan peaceable farming, many free-living animals can be seen, such as field hares or deer. They are happy about the poison-free food and the hedges that grow along the fields. A part of the harvest is especially left for these animals, for their vested right to habitats is respected. In vegan, peaceable farming, the conviction is that all life is connected to each other and is in communication. That is why the effort is made to again communicate with the fields, the tiny living beings in the soil, and with the plants. Thankfulness and respect and appreciation are felt for what nature gives us. The farmer cultivates and cares for the fields, but growth and flourishing are in the hands of God. So the aids and instructions for vegan peaceable farming were not invented by some farmers, but during the 1980s and 90s were conveyed through the prophetic spirit. It is a feast for the eyes when in the midst of the dead agricultural desert, a field of oats appears, which is cultivated by vegan peaceable farming. Here there is life. There is humming and buzzing everywhere. Thousands of insects are feasting on the nectar of the flowers. The oats are growing embedded in a flower paradise. Right next to it, a field on which all the weeds have been sprayed to death. Since, in addition, chemical fertilizer is used, the life under the ground may already well be largely dead. What a difference in contrast to this living oat field. On another field, sweet lupine is being grown, which later will be used as the basis for many popular products such as spreads, patties, even lupine coffee and much, much more. Here too, the lupine is growing together with many blossoming weeds, better called companion plants. We see the blossoming life, for here too no poison is sprayed and no chemicals, not even manure or slurry, were spread on this field. The life expresses its thanks with a diversity of fine aromatic fragrances from the plants and flowers and a wonderful diversity of insects. Here we sense and see the fullness of life above, and thus also under the ground. Along with the intended three-field rotation, which every third year gives the soil a year of rest to regenerate, so-called succession fields are also laid out. Here, nature can freely develop for an unspecified or a longer period of time so that a natural biotope-like vegetation develops. Nature can set the tone on this sunflower field as well. In contrast, on the neighboring fields prevails the wasteland that is customary today, and aside from the desired highly bred crop plants, there's no trace of life to be seen. Here too, not a single flower, no bees, no butterflies, no birds. This culture of death has meanwhile spread everywhere, even in rural areas. Exploitation of the soil for profit rules everywhere. For a larger yield, the destruction of microorganisms and plants and the resulting consequences are apparently approved. Even larger animals such as deer, foxes, hares, and many more are mercilessly shot down. On the fields of death, shooting towers are everywhere in great numbers. Jesus certainly never wanted any such thing. His teaching was essentially, do not do to another what you do not want to have done to you. How far humankind has distanced itself from this Christian principle. Nature that has been brought out of balance reacts ever more with storms, thunderstorms, flooding, climate changes, and other phenomena and natural disasters. But who is the cause of these disasters? Who has brought nature out of balance? Nature or human beings? By now, shouldn't we be talking about human disasters instead of natural disasters? Humankind has not yet understood that everything is connected with everything. People cannot imagine that through the immense destruction of the life in the soil, humankind has created a huge cause, the effect of which will be discharged in due course over countries, continents, and nations. That this has already started to happen can be seen in the daily news. On September 23, 2017, the German news magazine Focus, under the title "Our Earth is Burning," gave a large and impressive report about the disasters that will befall mankind. Scenarios were described which we can hardly imagine today. In many densely populated regions, alone through the high temperatures, survival will hardly be possible. The farmer Jens Petermann is certain that encroachments upon the system of nature can definitely have the result that, triggered by this wrongdoing, diseases and inhospitable conditions for life will come to the people. We should be aware that without us, the Earth became a blue-green planet, and it could also be one again without us. Humankind has the choice. The possibilities are given to practice an agriculture that is close to nature in the spirit of a true Christian attitude, in which one does not do to another, in the sense of not doing to the life in the soil and to the nature and the animal kingdom either what one does not want to have done to oneself. But will there be enough farmers who change their way of thinking and want to take this path before more insects and birds become extinct and even more soil life is destroyed? Farmers to whom the conservation of life, the animals and nature is more important than a quick profit? Will there be enough customers who are willing to support a way of cultivation that is not only nature-friendly, but also close to nature, that strives to live in unity with nature and the animals? Or will everything remain as it is, and poisons, chemicals and slurry will continue to be spread on the fields which kill the soil life, causing the extinction of insects and birds and contaminating the groundwater until it is too late and humankind has single-handedly largely destroyed the basis for its life and above all for the survival of its descendants? There are scientists who think the wheel can no longer be turned back, that in the end nobody wants to voluntarily give up growth and profit. Yet that is a mistake. If humankind does not voluntarily turn back the wheel, sooner or later nature will do it. The future will tell.